state your name and your
Thank
institution.
you. I'm John Coonrod with the Hunger Project, and my question follows on to Richard's comment about local level knowledge of nutrition. We're so far from that. And I'm just wondering what are some of the initiatives that can, say on an annual basis, provide communities with community level nutritional status information? What will it take to get us there, and how can we all push on it?
Yeah, here's an example that I like a lot. I was recently in Guatemala, and it's not the only country, Peru also does it. They have a road to health card that not only has a normal weight for age, so you can road to health card and different, but they also have a turn the page. They also can chart it by height for age, and they measure every 3 months, which is about every 2 to 3 months, and they track it. So yeah, maybe it's a little late once the kid begins to get stunted if it's 18 months, but the fact that they're tracking it, there are things they can do, and it presents a knowledge and an awareness of it, and then they can come in and bring in interventions such as, like their micronutrient powders, etc. So that's a very example I like to see everywhere. Not yet, but they could do it very easily. Like when you walk into a health facility, the first thing you see is their catchment area. Then you see the chart on what their vaccination coverage is. They can do the same thing if they have that chart on stunting, and that is a critically important stage, and it could work. We need a little more operations research, a little work, but it's ready to go, I think.
Yes, on the fourth row.
Thank you very much. My name is Alberta Nyaku. I work with PATH, and I also work on a program called Maximizing the Quality of Scaling Up Nutrition, and we provide some level of support to scaling up nutrition programs. I just think that this is the time for us, following up on ICN2, to really focus on what we can do with the scaling up nutrition movement. It's an evaluation report just came out this January on its activities within the past 4 or 5 years. And it's got some really interesting recommendations. And I think that for us, as CSOs, donors, and so on, supporting this effort, we need to look at how best can we support some of these activities. I realize that this movement has caught the attention of governments. Now we have about 54 countries that are participating in this movement. And all kinds of requests have been coming from these countries for various levels of activities on scaling up. We need to capitalize on this at this time. Thank you.
Lucy, maybe you want to comment on that a bit, having engaged with the Sun.
Sure, happy to. I'd also like to hear from Jomo on this.
And Jomo as well.
So definitely, I think that I was reflecting on the independent comprehensive evaluation report that came out, and it was very sobering in some respects in that it definitely highlighted some of the challenges and limitations of SUN. But at the same time, it recognized that this issue of undernutrition and stunting in particular really has been put on the map because of SUN, because of that country ownership, because these countries, there was political leadership at country level, both at the national level, and you started to see that kind of trickle down. The other thing that SUN did, very well is this recognition and operationalization of the fact that that nutrition is multi-sectoral and forcing conversations between ministries, which is something that had been a long time coming. But I'm curious to hear, Jomo's reaction to sort of the independent expert evaluation and also just kind of looking at SUN and its role.
And Jomo, as you do that, a question I would have is, are we at a point yet, or is it premature, to really see government budgets shifting toward the priority of the SUN? Are we seeing investments at the national level along the SUN agenda?
One of the unusual features of the ICN2 was that there were finance ministers at the ICN2, and it was very, very interesting to have finance ministers participate in such a conference. I think that's a good sign. The highest number of ministers who participated were from Africa. And the African Union has appointed a nutrition champion, and we are definitely seeing some shift in movement. But I think it's also important to remember that if we look at the question of just having a high level of commitment is not good enough. If you look at what is called the HANSI index, Hunger and Nutrition Commitment Index, some countries do very well on that index, but the nutrition outcomes are nothing to shout about. So something is clearly wrong, as Rolf emphasized earlier. So we need to better understand this. In the case of the Sun, I think we have seen very important progress achieved by the Sun, particularly in relation to the 54 countries whom they have been able to where they have a presence, and particularly in terms of child undernutrition, the first 1,000 days and a focus on stunting, although curiously the stunting focus is up to 2 years of age, in line with the first 1,000 days rather than the usual measurement at the age of 5. Now, this I think what Lucy was alluding to is that this evaluation report is actually quite critical of the limitations and the fact that that they're now they've come up against a wall, a limitation, and it will be very difficult for them to just carry on trying to reach more and more countries. And I think many people who have been closely observing Sun, including the supporters and the funders, are quite aware of some of the limitations. Also the method of work. The method of work has not and sought to emphasize enhancing national level capacities. But instead, I think in the interest of trying to find a quick solution, you've often had foreign experts parachuted in. Now, foreign experts parachuting in at the invitation of the president or a prime minister of a country is good because you have national level commitment at the highest level, which is very important. But at the same time, it is not rooted and connected with the existing capacity which already exists, capacity which might reside in a health ministry or in an agricultural ministry. And this basically means that it is very difficult then for the government, for the modest government capacity which is already in existence, for that to be built up. And during the negotiations over the ICN2, I actually had an opportunity to listen to quite a number of women representatives from Africa who were explaining some of the difficulties they had with foreign experts coming in and drafting very cogent and very impressive looking nutrition plans, which they were not in a position to follow up on. So I think this is not to deny the very important contributions Sun has made, but we really need to recognize the limitations and to also look at what else needs to be done and try to complement that very important contribution which Sun has made.
Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you. David Lambert, Iowa State University. Jomo and all of you, thank you for a critically important message. What message would you have to the land-grant university system and to the private sector, specifically on research gaps that you would like to underline and emphasize? And related to the research, the huge communication engine you find both in the university system and the private sector. Thank you.
Richard, maybe I'll let you take that on first.
Yes, Feed the Future, the U.S. government's Feed the Future initiative is partnering very strongly with the land-grant U.S. universities. In fact, we have, I think, 24 of what we call innovation labs, and they actually also involve a whole bunch more universities, and they are critical to establish relationships with country universities and in terms of technical assistance, training, and more importantly, to promote food security programs, whether it's Virginia Tech and Integrated Pest Management, or whether it's Cornell or Tufts, or all of these other universities Michigan State University and others that work on our program. So they're very, very critical. And what we're trying to do is to take this powerful force and link them with our country programs, and so that if we have a university involved like we do in terms of Michigan State, in terms of new bean varieties that they can get implemented in Feed the Future areas, and and that expertise can build a really on the ground food security system. So this is what our goal is. So I think they have an important, but not simply as a research arm. It has to be involved in capacity building, transfer of information, and implementation.
For those who are not familiar with the U.S. land grant university system, this is one of the original infrastructures set up around agriculture, and actually often linked very closely to nutrition, having been a graduate of one. Ralph, did you have something you want to say?
Well, I think the land grant universities are responsible for the incredible gains in U.S. agriculture. And what I'm wondering, in my peripheral observation, an area is in diffusion of the technologies and the new varieties that are either more adaptive or have better nutritional value or more productive in context. Now, I don't know if that's great. Again, it's the expert who has an expertise in the science versus the cultural go-between expert who understands how you diffuse things to farmers who are unwilling to take major risks and so forth. But to me, that's a huge area that research is needed, and partnership probably with the land grants on the development of those new varieties, but their introduction and their diffusion in context appropriate places is an absolute critical piece.
Questions? Yeah, you do need a mic.
Great. Nabiha Kazi with Humanitas Global, and I chair the Community for Zero Hunger. So, it's really interesting. I had my staff look at the number of conferences and conversations 6-7 years ago around nutrition, food security, ag, and there are probably about 3 to 5 of them. And last year, of the major global ones, there were something like 16. So it's very exciting, but the part that makes me a little bit nervous is I feel that the scale is tipped a little bit. Tipped in the sense that we're having a lot of conversations around policy engagement along institutional to institutional arrangements, and we haven't had, I feel, enough of a robust conversation on how to engage at the household community level. I know we're all talking about behavior change and the importance of moms and households, but I don't see that depth coming across, and we may be working a little bit in our comfort zone. Because sun, for example, even 1,000 days, I know some of your institutions have limitations. You have to deal with member states, right? But is it time, for lack of a better word, that bad word, for the rest of us to be a bit more activist and say, you all do your policy thing. We need to create outraged, super empowered communities to say, yes, we demand this and we need this, because no public health change is sustained when you just have policy and when you just have the funding. You also need to make sure the demand is there, and that's critical for the private sector as well. So I'd like your observations on that.
Who would like to take that?
I can start. 1,000% agree with you. This has to be a movement of people, not just institutions and countries, right? There's, I think, a lot of interesting stuff going on out there when you look at the activism and what the power of a mom. In the United States, there was this sort of outrage that got started because a mom found out what was being served at her kid's school, and it's this thing called pink slime that was in the meat products that were being served in the kid's school, and all of a sudden it became this huge social media moment that ultimately led to change, ultimately led to this ingredient getting out of the school system. So change is possible, and change, I think, kind of building that social movement aspect of, how do we actually make the kinds of changes that we want to see happen kind of from the ground up. One of the interesting things around ICN2, actually, in the meeting that was had on civil society, it was civil society and social movements. So you had people that were pastoralists, fisher folk, these people that were, very much affected by the problems of malnutrition. The people themselves actually were there. It wasn't just organizations like HKI or 1,000 Days that were part of, the civil society convening. It was actually the people that, were actually dealing with these. Which was totally a different way of working. It was absolutely outside of, at least, my comfort zone, our comfort zone. A lot more negotiation in terms of, the ideologies and the different points of views, and it's messy. It is messy and it's complicated. But what choice do we have?
So before we turn to the virtual questions, I would like to ask Jomo, this access to the political process varies across countries, and the extent to which a movement, a human voice movement, can actually change policy is quite different around the world. Where do you see, look at the change over the last 10 years. Do you see this access improving? Are we sort of, plateauing on the ability for the movements, the voice, to actually change? I mean, you're talking about a lot of governments where it's quite volatile, and there's a reason why they don't give access to the voice, for better or for worse. So I'd be interested in your...
I think we have a situation where of great differences in different parts of the world. You have, as Lucy emphasized, that, and Nabiha emphasized, there is greater consciousness, at least of some of the major challenges of malnutrition at the popular level. You have women, for example, in India, demanding remuneration in food, in balanced diets of lentils and pulses, etc., rather than in cash, because if cash might be appropriated by the men folk who might then use it to buy tobacco, etc., and so the whole it's a very complex kind of situation there. In Brazil, for example, the gains of zero hunger in abolishing hunger per se are now well recognized, but the minister, for example, in response to demands from communities, has been talking about how some problems are best achieved through school feeding programs, but some problems are not well achieved through those programs, and the need for certain types of specific interventions. In this country, I think much of the initiative actually been led at the municipal level. You have municipal initiatives. I lived in New York City for about 7.5 years, much of which during the time of Mayor Bloomberg, and you all know about the two soda, the soda controversy. Now he has a media, he's got a media empire under his belt that could be deployed to deal with, to promote certain nutrition messages. So I think one has to think of the different kinds of opportunities. With reference to the earlier point, we have a dean in UCLA, I think, who specializes in communicating health messages, and why not nutrition messages through television, advisor to Grey's Anatomy and CSI. SVU,
BSI nutrition.
and so I think that one has to recognize that popular power and popular influence has many different expressions, including consumer rights, but also other forms of expression which are important. And in a large society such as the US, often the point when popular interventions are most effective are actually at the municipal and community level.
Right. Canada has been quite innovative in that area as well. I'd like to go to the virtual world, and I believe, Simone, we may have some questions.
We do have one question. It comes from, on Twitter, Gaines Executive Director Mark Van Emeringen. And he asked, what is the role of the private sector in the SDGs?
We heard that. What is the role of the private sector in the SDGs? Thank you, Mark Van American.
Well, I thought I'd given an illustration of how one can engage the private sector in very important ways, but specifically on the nutrition issues. But there are many other examples of a similar type. Perhaps Richard and
Maybe
others
Richard.
might.
Richard, do you want to
Well, maybe the better question is, what is the role of the private sector in the Finance for Development
Yes.
Conference, which is a very big event also coming up, and it is linked to the SDGs. So I think that financing money comes in handy, as Lucy has pointed out. And so we need to take a look at what the sources are and where the likely growth is going to be. And the Finance for Development is going to have a lot to say about how far we can go in the implementation of the SDGs. But certainly, and of course, there's been a tremendous amount of work in terms of codes and responsibilities, but clearly we need more investment, and it looks like the private sector is a big source of that.
I would just want to add, I think, as you had rightly pointed out, there's not going to be enough public money to go around to necessarily feed 9 billion people adequately, so the private sector becomes a very important partner. Ralph, final comment. I believe we're at time.
Sure. I mean, the private sector is as complex as nutrition is. And I'd like to take on one piece of that, and that is looking at capital inputs for increased production and better production, and being able to have outlets that provide and sell hybrid seeds, for example, or the fertilizer inputs that are necessary in many parts of, like some of the arid parts of the Sahel. There's just not much, or using water better that's there, and that kind of investment. And I think in those respects, private sector is critical. Sometimes we think about it at these huge food conglomerates, and they're going to be around whether the SDGs are around or not, long after the SDGs are around. How those get aligned with nutrition and health is a major challenge that I'm not quite sure how to tackle. But that requires also the demand for nutritious foods, because they will respond to, you vote with your dollar, but I don't think a lot of the world is there yet, and I think the powers and marketing forces are convinced us that we actually, I buy happiness every day when I take a Diet Coke. I mean, that's what apparently that's what they're marketing, right? No, but I think we need to begin to, at least in some of the private sector plays a major role, particularly in some of the food production pieces in marginalized communities and water use, I think.
And let's not forget that farmers are often private sector.
They are.
Businesses, yeah. Okay, well, I think we're at time. I don't know whether Schengen, you have the last few words as our host, but thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting panel.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay.
I mean, just a thank you, the panelists, and also all of you. But a couple of, on the private sector, it's not just money, Richard. I think it's more important is their practice, how they can really link their business practice to deliver good nutrition.
Absolutely.
This is probably the most critical. Today we have not discussed about policy. Again, it's not just money, actually it's policy. And lots of policies has messed up with nutrition. We continue to subsidize some of the very sort of carb-intense food production at the cost of more nutritious food crops, pulses, beans, vegetables, and fruits. And that's another area we have not discussed much. I think we should pay attention to that. Then Richard and probably Lucy also mentioned about the individual community initiatives. The question is how can we really scale them up from one community to the whole county, to the whole state or province, or to the whole country. This itself is a research topic. Finally, this is also a bit more promotion. I think on February 4th, we're going to have a policy seminar on social marketing, right? Is that 4th of February? Monday, right. That's exactly the topic, how we're going to communicate key messages around nutrition. So it's not, I learned that it's not social media, it's a social marketing. So why don't you come here next Monday? Thank you very much.